Already 19. I'm doing a quick rehearsal last week. We are already in 1923. As I said, he gets his BA and MA and doctorate from Gießen. This is a university. And he divorces his wife, as we said, and in 1924, he is becoming a member in the faculty teaching in the rabbinical seminary in Berlin. And he would become, throughout all of his life, he would become very much identified with this institution. I would almost say, unfortunately, that his fate would be somewhat similar to the fate of that institution. And both of them are not going to be very positive. That's, I think, a way to say it. Now, we spoke about the different rabbis that came to Berlin at the time. It was a very, very interesting place with people as different as the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rav Yosef B. Soloveitchik, and many others going there around and meeting and speaking, and everything was very, very active. However, the whole celebration is coming to a full stop in 1933 as the rise of Nazism. Rav Weinberg, in the beginning, is somewhat optimistic as to the chances of Jews to being able to withhold and contain this new regime. He hopes that when ascending to power, that itself would tame the Nazis, as happens sometimes. Some people, very extreme, when they come to govern, they discover that not everything they were speaking about is really applicable. We unfortunately know very well that that was not the case with Hitler. However, that's what Rabbi Weinberg believed in the beginning, and he even was trying to tone down the anti-Semitism in Germany throughout, that it would not be seen like that in Jews around the world, because he was worried that the reaction of Jews around the world against the Nazi government is making the life of the Jews in Germany even more miserable, because he says you are punishing the German government, the national German government, and they punish us. So he asked the Jews outside of Germany to stop their ban on German merchandise, etc. And he was very much busy with that, to the extent that some Jews outside of Germany saw him. I mean, the whole thing nowadays, it's the pittiness of it all, as I think we mentioned at the name of a certain book. But they saw him as an agent of Hitler. They accused him of being a mouthpiece for Hitler, for he was trying to convince the Jews outside of Germany not to become supporters of the Nazis, but at least to be less anti against the Nazis, hoping that that would help to repair the relationship between the Nazis and the Jews in Germany. Mark Shapiro has a long letter that Rabbi Weinberg, not alone, but with other organizations in Germany, Jewish organizations, sent to Hitler himself. It's addressed to Hitler himself, a very long letter in which he speaks about the contribution of the Jews to Germany and how this contribution can continue. And that, it's very sad, just very, very, very sad to read it. Now, he does say, if you don't want us in Germany, it would be better that you tell us the truth, and that we'd know that we need to go. But if not, then let's try. And this, again, the words, he couldn't have known what would be their meaning, but he says, let's try to solve the Jewish problem together. As we know, Hitler decided to solve the Jewish problem, but not together, but by himself. So that's in 1933. As the years progress, obviously, Rabbi Weinberg understands that the fate of the Jews will not be positive in Germany. However, he keeps his optimism, he keeps his faith that, okay, we would lower our heads and we will be able to survive this storm, which must pass. And is being offered, by the way, in 1934, is being offered by Rabbi Hertz in London to come to England and become the Av Beidin, the main the prime Dayan in England. And he considers that, and he refuses because it says, I don't want to abandon my people in Germany. He felt responsibility for the Jews in Germany, so he decides to stay with the Jews. We have his letters. Now again, he couldn't have fathomed what does it mean to stay in Germany. So the whole thing, again, we read it. It's very, very difficult to forget what we know and re-enter the minds of people in 1934, 1935. So he stays in Germany. At a certain point, the Nazis decide that out of their pity on animals, they should ban the shechita, the ritual slaughtering of the Jews, because that makes pain and sorrow for the animals. So they were very worried about the welfare of the cows. And obviously the whole thing was a sham, and the point was to make the Jews even more miserable. So they banned the shechita ksheira. However, they said we would allow you, of course, to shachten if the animal would not feel any pain. So now came the question, is one allowed to electrically stun the animal before the shechita in order for it not to feel pain? The problem was that stunning caused damage, of course, to the body of the animal, and that may render it as a treif. So that was a very complicated halachic issue. And Rabbi Weinberg wrote extremely long, it's almost a book on the matter, but he understood that that's not a decision that he can make only by himself, because that relates to all Jews in the world, how shechita can be done. Everyone understood that if the Jews in Germany would declare that such a shechita is kosher, then other governments in other areas may also require similar measures. So he went to discuss it with who was considered the great Ashkenazic authority of the time, that was Reb Chaim Oizer Guzhinsky, which I think we spoke about. And Reb Chaim Oizer, in the beginning, he thought that maybe that can be allowed. However, after discussing it with other rabbis, they decided that mainly out of political, I mean, what is political? Political is not something negative. But as I said, because of the fallout that may be the result of such a leniency in Germany, then he cannot give Rabbi Weinberg his birkat haderech, his blessing for such a leniency. And more than that, if Rabbi Weinberg would decide to make such a leniency in Germany, then Rabbi Chaim Ozer Guzhinsky would have no other way but to denounce it and hurt the reputation, you may say, of Rabbi Weinberg on the way. And so Rabbi Weinberg decides not only that he would not publish an hater, he would not publish his answer even, because he felt that if he would publish his answer, then obviously the leniency would be justified. And he didn't want to come into a rift with Reb Chaim Ozer Guzhinsky, so he's stepping down with all, of course, you understand the outcomes, because that would mean the Jews in Germany would almost have no kosher meat. They could import, but who had money? The Jews were in a very bad economic shape, and because of the Germans, the German government obviously put many restrictions on Jews in general. And a part of that, many of the Germans were even more mehadrin, and they would not buy in any store that is owned by a Jew, or even a Jew was working in it. And the outcome of all of that was that many Jews were, as I said, in a very, very bad economic situation. And so no kosher meat was available. And this is in the world before soy, right, and other alternatives. If you didn't have meat, that would mean that a large extent of your food diet is out of your menu. Later, Reb Chaim, another clash between Reb Chaim Ozer Guzhinsky and Rav Weinberg was when one of the managers of this institution, the Berlin Seminary for Rabbis, that was one of the sons of Rav Ilzheimer, Rav Meir Hilzheimer, so Rav Azriel Hilzheimer was the one to establish the seminary. And one of his children, one of his sons, in the 30s had this idea, it's clear that the fate of the Jews in Germany is sealed, and that even if, again, no one imagined that everyone would be exterminated, but they are not going to produce rabbis in the near future. So maybe we should move. Where would we move the seminary? To Yerushalayim, which is being built. And there was even maybe someone that was willing to sponsor it. And he was beginning to run this idea. And in the beginning, Rabbi Weinberg it seems that he was willing to hear. But then Reb Chaim Ozer Guzhinsky, together with other rabbis, put all of the weight in order to block the moving of the seminary from Berlin to Eretz Israel, with the argument, and I'm overly simplifying here, it's a very, very complicated parasha, but the argument was what is good for the Jews in Germany, which is Torah im derech eretz and science, etc., 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 should not be exported to other Jews, because in the end it's a b'di'eved, it's something that is only being done because of the bad spiritual state of the Jews in Germany. And so we do not want to use these bitter medicines for healthy Jews in Eretz Israel. And in Eretz Israel there should be only holy yeshivot with no science, with no universities, with no anything that has to do with the modern way of life. And so they were able to stop this measure. Now, again, of course, Reb Chaim Ozer Guzhinsky could not know that stopping the seminary from moving means sealing the fate of its students. I mean, we have to know that, and that's not something I think that anyone can be judged for. By the way, again, Rabbi Weinberg himself didn't even, he was not the one that was attempting to move the seminary to Yerushalayim. He was just willing to hear it. After Rabbi Chaim Ozer Guzhinsky said no, then also Rabbi Weinberg said we need to stay in Germany. Not necessarily because he agreed that the seminary is only some type of a second-rate institution. As a matter of fact, he wrote he felt almost a personal offense by Reb Chaim Guzhinsky for degrading the institution so much. So he wrote to Rav Guzhinsky in a personal letter that was later published, saying, why do you say that our institution is not a holy yeshiva? We are yeshiva kdosha. Everything that we learn is for the sake of Torah, etc., etc., etc. But he felt that they need to stay in Germany anyway in order to guide the German Jews. So he also didn't protest too much. We can only imagine how would the Jewish life in Eretz Israel look like if the seminary, let's put into the side the lives of dozens, maybe hundreds of people that could have been saved. But putting that aside, it could have been completely different. What does it mean that to be modern Orthodox in Eretz Israel if the seminary would have been opened in Yerushalayim in the 30s? Meaning the whole way of Torah im derech eretz, which in a sense, and we spoke about it when we spoke about Rabbi Hirsch, has no continuation. It's very difficult nowadays to point on an institution that is a representative of Torah im derech eretz. YU, Yeshiva University, I don't think that it is representing what Rav Hirsch, and especially not what Rabbi Hilzheimer thought when they spoke about Torah im derech eretz. They represent other ideas, beautiful ideas, but that's not the way of Torah im derech eretz as it was developed in Germany. And here in Eretz Israel, I don't think that there is any such an institution. So modern Orthodoxy took a turn to other areas, which again I'm part of. So I'm very happy with where things are. Not very happy, but I'm happy with where things are. I think that we can use additional resources, but that's one thing. But in the end, Reb Chaim Ozer Guzhinsky was, and maybe that's what he wanted to do. He was able to curtail the continuation of the way of Rabbi Hilzheimer of the Rabbinical Seminary, and that indeed did happen. Meaning the seminary was closed in 1938 after Kristallnacht, about which we would speak in a few minutes, and was never to be reopened in the same way. I mean, other institutions were open, but no one of them had any success. And again, if I would ask you to name rabbis nowadays, leading prominent rabbis that are using Torah and Mada in the sense that it was used in the seminar in Berlin, we would all be very hard pressed to name such rabbis. I don't claim that there are no people like that. There are, but there are very few, very far between, and they are not prominent in the halachic authority. Yes.
Where does the Makon Tal and Makon Lev come?
These are beautiful institutions in which people are being trained to be optometrists and other physics, computers, but they do not direct scientific tools to Torah sources. And may I add hesitantly, and of course without chas v'chayla not wanting to say anything about anyone, but they do not train the leading rabbis of the next generation, which was what the seminar in Berlin was trying to do. In YU, they have yeshiva, they have college or university, and they do not mix them together. There are two different institutions. There is Ritz, Yeshivat Rabbeinu Yitzchak Elchanan, in which Torah is being taught as it was taught for hundreds of years, or maybe more, in Eastern European yeshivot. And Rabbi Soloveitchik, who is very well known, was extremely opponent of using scientific tools in the learning of the Talmud, and chas v'chayla in the learning of Torah, and that was the end of it. And the alumni of YU are also trained in other scientific fields. Again, this is beautiful. I am not chas v'chayla in any way degrading anything. I'm just pointing out that these are very different ways of seeing the integration of Torah and Mada. It's a question of to what extent do you interweave them. And Rabbi Weinberg was in favor, and the seminar in Berlin was in favor of creating a complete synthesis. While YU has two different institutions in one. This is yeshiva and university doing beautiful things and producing beautiful bogrim and rabbis. But it's a very different vision than what Rabbi Weinberg had in mind, or Hitzheimer had in mind. Also Bar Ilan in Eretz Israel. They have university, they have koilel. They do not produce rabbis so much. They produce especially science and scientific methods, but they do not see I don't think so. Maybe they do, but maybe they do see themselves, but they do not in the end produce, again, the leading rabbis of the next generation. Those are being produced in the yeshivot. I'm speaking about the modern Orthodox world, not in the Haredi world, but even in the modern Orthodox world, the leading rabbis are being produced in yeshivot, and the yeshivot, by and large, are the traditional yeshivot with the traditional limud Torah. Speak on a very personal note. I myself learned in Yeshivat Har Etzion. I learned in University Bar Ilan. I learned Talmud. But I do not mix the two. When I teach in the yeshiva, I do not use the tools that I was taught in university, and I do not aspire to do that. It's enough. I have enough on my plate just teaching on the traditional method.
And the good they use very modern scientific approaches to literature.
To literature, but not to Talmud, not to halacha. And
only Torah.
Yeah, and only Torah, and by that also in a very, very usually in a very traditional way. Meaning, if new approaches would be taken in, they would be completely converted. Right? There would be a complete giur in articles that would be published by the Gush, people that already left Gush that do whatever they want. But if you'd go to Torah, to our virtual Bet Midrash, then I don't believe that you'd find any mention of Bible criticism, meaning in names and in references.
No.
It may be somewhere in the background, and someone that is looking for it would be able to know this was written as an answer to a certain Bible critic, but it would not be referenced to, and that's by an ideal.
I was referring to the tools thing.
Yeah, again, but these are very in a very soft way.
Yeah.
In a very soft way, yes.
Who would you say is not produce prominent rabbi? Who choose prominent rabbi, or how rabbi become prominent? What does it mean prominent?
This is, as you can understand, a subjective question. But in the end, it's a question of how many students and followers someone has. Does he have a yeshiva? How many students are in the yeshiva?
He has a yeshiva, but if he has, like a big auditorium in a university, it wouldn't be considered prominent rabbi.
Yeah. Again, what is his impact on the halachic world for the next generation? These are questions that can be asked, and in the end, they can be valued. Sometimes it may be difficult to value them as things, in the present. But 100 years later, or 60 years later, or 50 years later, you can very easily say, I think, that someone was not prominent. Okay, it's what can I say? What can I say? Each one can look around and decide for himself. You don't need me to say who is prominent, who is not. You can look for yourself. Okay, so that's 1933, 1934. The seminary stays in Berlin, and Rabbi Weinberg becomes the leading authority for the Jews in Germany and we may almost say in Western Europe. So many questions are being sent to him. Professor Shapiro writes something that it's difficult to say. He says the height of career for Rabbi, the rabbinical career, its height was during the Nazi regime. Yes, and he's leading the seminary, hundreds of students. The seminary, by the way, is thriving for the simple reason that Jewish students cannot go to universities anymore. So the only high learning institution they can go to is the seminary for rabbis. So it's flourishing. It's very again, it's very difficult to put ourselves into what is going on there. And also, the Nazi regime is almost have no interest in how and what do they teach in this Jewish institution, because they are planning to exterminate them all anyway. So they didn't really care. That is very different from the attitude that was just 20 or 30 years before, when the Germans wanted to Germanize the Jews, and they were very active and pushing their nose right into the curriculum of the institution. So now suddenly, Rabbi Weinberg, who became also the rector, the main rector of the institution, now has a completely free hand to choose how Torah would be taught in the institution, and he is very proud of what they are doing. They would write many years later that he believes that, again, maybe it has to do with what we just spoke about. He writes, we see that the institution was extremely, after the war, the post-war years, he writes that the seminar was very successful. So many of its alumni are now serving in important roles. So you see its influence. However, in other מכתבים, letters that he wrote, and again are being quoted in this wonderful book, then he is complaining why our students are shy about their learning in the seminary. So you'd have someone writing his CV, right? And he would say, I learned in Slobodka, I learned in that. I had some lessons in Germany or in Berlin, not even writing the name of the institution or of the rabbis. Why? Of course, because they were worried that in the minute people would be labeled, rabbis would be labeled as alumni of the rabbinical seminary in Berlin, they would not be offered any more positions in yeshivot. So people were shy for mentioning the name of the seminary, which caused him, obviously, great pains. Yes, he thought that is the only way to speak with the new generation.
That's what they always say. We have to have the high standards in secular and Torah studies.
Yeah, it's very much correct. But Rav Soloveitchik didn't think that you need to mix the two. He thought that you need to have this both. But he never, to my limited knowledge, he never used these critical tools on the learning of Talmud, and he even saw using them as a cheapening of the Talmud, of historicizing it. He was very much opponent of historicizing the learning of Gemara, or even philosophizing. Yeah. Okay. So many questions he was asked. Just to mention a few. Some came out of the hardships of the economical position of the Jews. So he was willing to allow steps that he didn't allow before, such as opening a store on Shabbat after selling it to a non-Jew. Heter mechira, we may say, for stores. So it was something that was a great opponent before, but now he allowed it because he said the livelihood of Jews is in grave danger. So there was one thing. Another thing was, I think we already spoke about the question of moving graves, because Jews were worried that graves would be desiccated. So maybe moving them to central Batei Almin would be a wiser approach. He thought that it is mutar by halacha, but he said if we, the Jews, would begin to move the graves, and the government, Nazi government, would see that that is something that is that can be done, then they would also do it without asking our consent. Now, again, seeing it from knowing what happened later, the whole thing seems to us very mute. But that was something that was very much on their mind back then. Another question that I quoted here, but as always, what we want to do, our time is very short. But there was a question because they were not allowed to use public buildings anymore. So they had only shuls for public gatherings. So a few rabbis asked him, can we do concerts and other cultural activities, which the German Jews were very much fond of, can we do that in the shul? And he has a long answer, which he published much later. You know what? It does work, I think. Please, for you. Just a second. Yes, I think that's one. Okay, so you look at source Hay. That is from the response to his book, Shriday Ash, Remains from the Fire. Many answers there were written during the use of the Nazi regime and during the war. תשובה זו כתבתי, so say. This answer was written in בשנות הזעם של שלטון הנאצים יימח שמם, in the years of Raf, when the Nazi regime, יימח שמם, while the Jews in Ashkenaz, in Germany, and in other lands were under the control of הרשע, המטורף, המנוול, יימח שמו וזכרו. So the evil, the crazy, the degraded, יימח שמו וזכרו, כולם היו נתונים למרמס תחת רגלי משרתיו הרוצחים והטורפים. So we were all under the feet of his servants, murderer servants. בין שאר הגזירות האיומות, so among other the decrees, נאסר על יהודי אשכנז להתאסף במקומות פומביים מחוץ לבתי כנסיות ותפילה, so they were not allowed to gather in other places. The Jews were not allowed to gather for public gathering outside of בתי כנסיות. Now he says, why do I publish it? מלבד הערך ההיסטורי, יש לתשובה זו גם תועלת עיונית להלכה ולמעשה בשביל קהילות רבות של נדחי ישראל. So he says a part of the historical value, which is, again, very interesting. How many rabbis do you know that are even aware, let alone to write it down, about the importance of the historical value of the responses? Usually rabbis publish their answers because they want to teach the halacha or the Torah that they teach. But Rabbi Weinberg has awareness to the historical value, and he published it not only for its Torah content, but also for its historical teaching. He says, but a part of the historical teaching, there is also, it may be even practical nowadays, because there are places in which Jews cannot gather but in shuls, because they don't have the means or otherwise to gather in other places. And he says, בכוונה השמטתי מתוך תשובה זו את החלק הפלפולי. I do not write here all of the פלפול, but only the bottom line. So, על דבר שאלתו, אם מותר להרצות הרצאות של חול בבתי כנסת, is it allowed to make secular lectures in shuls? וגם אם מותר לעשות שם קונצרטים. Are you allowed to have concerts in a shul? וכבוד תורתו כתב שהכיום הוא שעת הדחק, מאחר שהעם שרוי בצער, לפי שנדחו משאר מקומות, והם סובלים מגידופים וחירופים, ממצווה לעודדם ולחזק את רוחם. So, there is a mitzvah. You'd say, so don't have secular lectures. No, it is a mitzvah to strengthen the spirit of the Jews. They are really downtrodden, and you want to do everything that you can, that in your hands, in order to lift their spirits a little. וגם יש לחשוש שלא ייגררו אחרי החופשיים שהם עושים בבתי כנסיות שלהם קונצרטים. Also we have to remember that in Germany you have reforms and they do have concerts. They didn't send a question to Weinberg. They have concerts in their shuls, in their temples, better say. And if someone would go just to a concert, he would remain for the shiur afterwards, right? And then for tefillah, and who knows what would happen. So of course you need to compete, right? It's in a sense. By the way, it's so interesting. So we are in 34, 35. There is a sword hanging over the head of everyone. But the questions of would the Jew go to a temple or to a shul, is it still it's a question that is relevant. So he is having a whole discussion, which he says, I cut off the discussion. I cut off even the non-discussion, right, that he is having here, and I went immediately to the bottom line. היוצא מכל הנ"ל להלכה. So what is the halacha? What is the law? א', להשמיע הרצאות, just having lectures in shul, מותר מצד הדין. So it is מותר. ויותר טוב שקודם ההרצאה יאמרו איזה פסוקים. But in order to make it slightly better, so the lecturers should give a few psukim. Now, I'm not exactly clear what he thought that how it was. So it would be a lecture about Githe or about some German, literature, and you'd begin with some psukim which are related, not related. They say Rabbi Chanina ben Akashia in there. I'm not sure how exactly did he envision that. But it says, first, before they would give a few psukim, מובן מאליו שמותר רק לאדם שמוחזק כירא שמיים, אבל לא כחופשי בדעותיו. So, obviously, the lecturer should be someone that is a ירא שמיים. Don't bring a lecturer that is not. לעשות קונצרטים חילוניים אסור, but music, secular music is אסור completely in the shul. קונצרטים דתיים, if you have a religious concert, he says, this is something שאין רוח רבותינו נוחה ממנו. He says, the rabbis would not be happy with that. However, במקום מחלוקת, if there is a big dispute, and you see that that's the only way that the Jews would remain in shul, אפשר שיש מקום להתיר. There may be some room for leniency, even for a religious concert, bringing a singer or someone to the... No, we don't speak about the social hall, we speak about the shul itself. I think it's very strange to think about it, right? But I would, difficult situations sometimes requires difficult decisions, and that would be very far from the most difficult decision that was taken in these years. I just thought it's an interesting side note. דבר זה פשוט שחלילה וחלילה להניח שעבור אנשים ונשים בתערובות זה איסור גמור. He says, even if we do have lectures and concerts, then you must still have the separation between men and women. ובפירוש אני אומר שכל היתר הוא רק בזמן הזה, and I say that all of this היתר for lectures and concerts are only in our, meaning in the times of the Nazi regime, שהוא שעת הדחק כידוע, ואם ירצה השם כאשר ירחיב השם גבולנו, and הקדוש ברוך הוא expand again our abilities, אז נשוב בעזרת השם להיות זהירים בקדושות בית הכנסת בכל החומר, then we would return to be stringent with the holiness of shul as much as we are able to. So that's, I think, very interesting tshuva and an example of the type of material that he had to deal with. Now, in 1938, Kristallnacht, everything is destroyed, including the Bet Midrash LeRabbanim, the seminary for rabbis in Berlin, and the Gestapo gives a message to Rabbi Weinberg that he needs immediately to leave Germany. So he is at the same day, he is leaving Germany, leaving behind most of his hand manuscripts, written manuscripts, which are lost. The very few answers that were saved by his student, Rav Professor Eliezer Berkovich, that some of you may know. So he was able to save some of the material of Rav Weinberg, which was later published as Sriday Ash. That's why he called his responsa the remnants from the fire, because these were the very few manuscripts that he was able to keep. He became extremely sick. He comes to Poland, he becomes extremely sick. It's obviously a combination of physical and spiritual or psychological deterioration. Is accompanied by his students to Kovna. Later he comes to Warsaw in order to be treated, but there in Warsaw, Second World War breaks. And as we all know, in 1939, the Nazis conquer half of Poland, including Warsaw. And now Rabbi Weinberg finds himself in the Warsaw ghetto. Let's read source Vav, a few lines that he wrote later about, very, very short, about his experiences, if experience is the right word, in the Warsaw ghetto. source Vav, כאן נתגלתה החיה הגרמנית הרעה בכל עיזוז נוראותה. Now the Germanic beast, evil beast, was revealed in all of its terribleness. Now again, these are people that they adored the Germans and their culture. It's very difficult for us to understand the shock that they had. Seeing, for us, it's too easy. It's something, yes, even from the most sophisticated nation, such barbarity can happen. But for them, it was something that was just unimaginable. That the people that produced the best philosophy, the best literature, the best theaters, the best everything.
Yeah, language.
Yes. It was like unbelievable that they would be become the most barbaric nation that ever lived. That was, they couldn't contain it. It was very difficult. נבלותה, שפלותה, מעשי אכזריות. So the acts of cruelty, תעלולי חרפה, כאותם של כנופיות המרצחים בגטו הוורשאי, לא ראו השמיים והארץ מיום היברם. This is from the creation of the world. Such barbaric actions were never done. רעבון, צמאון, קיפאון מקור, hunger, thirstness, people freezing to death. These were the easiest of the troubles, he says. אראה בנחמה, he takes oath. אם לא ראיתי גופות אנשים, נשים וילדים מושלכות על המדרכות ונדרסות ברגלי הבורחים מפחד מוות והרג. So people were falling down and then they were stamped by other Jews that were fleeing from death. בין המושלכים ושוכבים בחוצות נמצאו גם אנשים, חציים חיים. So people were just lying in the city, and we all know the pictures, I think, from the Warsaw ghetto, of people half dead, half alive. You don't even know if they live, and they just, people lie there on the floor in the street for days. No one, no relatives, no one comes to the rescue. נפלו על הארץ מעין אונים, נפחו את נשמתם, התגלגלו באפר, באין מי שירימם ויביאם לקבור. We have a testimony from someone in the Warsaw ghetto, again brought by Professor Shapiro, that Rabbi Weinberg was, because, as I would explain in a minute, he was a citizen, he was a Russian citizen, which for about 2 years was very good, because the Russians were in alliance with the Nazis. So everyone that had Russian citizenship, now they were Jews, it's not that the Germans would let them just go, but they were not murdered immediately. So they made Rabbi Weinberg the head of the Vad Hatzalah in the Warsaw ghetto because he was able to speak with the Gestapo without being immediately shot. So he was, and we have testimonies of him going in the streets and trying to save people, just saving their lives. Obviously, the whole thing was a drop in the bucket. But when he writes here, he writes from what he personally experienced. אימת מוות וחרדת עינויים קשים ממוות נפלו על כל שוכני הגטו. So the fear of death and the fear from torture, which would be even worse than death, was feared by all the residents of the ghetto. מעשים בכל יום. So these were things that happened every day. שחיילים גרמנים, German soldiers, או קציני צבא, או officers, שוטטו בחוצות, was just walking around, והיכו בשוטי ברזל שבידם את כל הנפגש. They were hitting with metal rods. Anyone that they would meet. מעשים בכל, היכו על העיניים ועל הראש. בלי רחם. No mercy on the head, on the eyes. He says it was better even to be in the death trains than to be in the Warsaw ghetto. טובים היו קרונות המוות שהובילו גברים, נשים וטף מכל אפסי אירופה אל מחנות ההשמדה. אפילו תאי הגז וכבשוני. It was better to be in the gas chambers. Why? Because it would end. Than to live in the Warsaw ghetto for years. That's a testimony from someone that was there. As we all understand, in 41, what was his advantage immediately had turned into a disadvantage, because now, as a Russian citizen, he was also a citizen of an enemy state. And he is there in the Warsaw ghetto. Then something happens that cannot be explained, and is not explained also by Shapiro. It just says that something very strange happens. He is being called together with some other few dozens of Jews from the Warsaw ghetto, and they being sent to a work camp in Germany that was not designated specifically for Jews, but was designated for high or Russian officials. It seems that the Germans maybe thought they'd have some exchange deal for their own prisoners with Russian prisoners, so they kept them in this camp, and then maybe they were just forgotten. It is not clear. But he was able to survive the war. Now, again, this is a war camp. That's not... it's not some day camp in Camp Moshava. It's a very, very different sort of thing, but they wouldn't murder you. You just walk to death and starve to death, and if you'd be able to survive, they would not just kill you for the sake of killing. So he was treated, that's what he writes, I was treated no differently than the other. Being a Jew did not matter, which is a big thing in Germany of the time. And so he was able to survive. In 1945, he is rescued by the advancing American army. Excuse me? They liberated, yeah, excuse me. They were liberated. Again, he writes in his introduction to the Sridei, to his response, he says, I have no idea why I was saved. The only thing that I can say is that maybe I was not righteous enough to have the merit of being Mekadesh Hashem. But we know that from other survivors, this feeling of blame, of why I survived, I was no better than anyone else around me, so maybe I did something wrong to survive. That was the feeling of many, many, many of them. And he is completely broken, as you can understand. He's completely broken physically, mentally, in any way that you can think. And he's being hospitalized for many months. And almost by accident, in the hospital where he is being treated, he is being recognized, identified by one of his students that was a chaplain in the American army. And so he's being, so then letters begin to run around, because his main worry is because that he's a Russian citizen, he would be sent back to Russia, to the communist government under Stalin. I think that's the worst thing that can happen to you after surviving the whole war, to be sent. It happened to many Jews. So he's doing his best to get a visa and preferably a citizenship from a Western country. And he has a student named Shaul Weinberg in Switzerland. And this student is able to secure for him a visa and later a citizenship and brings him to Montreal, which I am surely again not pronouncing right. It's written in AUX in the end. Montreal, thank you. Montreux. And he's being sent to there, where he's being treated by Shaul Weinberg. He's the student of him very, very warmly. He's becoming, you have to remember, he has no family. So that becomes his family. But unfortunately, less than a year after he's coming there, the student of his is killed in a train accident. He falls from a train. The train, it seems, didn't stop in the station. So he tried to jump to the station, and he was killed by this fall. And he again feels that he remains alone in the world, and he is being treated by the widow of his student. So she cooks to him, she cleans his house, and he is raising the son of Shaul Weingart called Abba Weingart, Abba Avram Weingart, which is alive to this day. He lives in Yerushalayim, and he raises him as his son. He's teaching him, and to this day, this Abba Weingart, Abba Avram Weingart, is responsible for almost all of the publishing of the Torah. Of the Shriday from Yaakov Yechiel Weinberg, which I think is a beautiful thing of gratitude. Both of them. Rabbi Weinberg to his student by raising his son, and the son to his rabbi by publishing his Torah. So that's in all of this in 1946. And then something very strange happens, because he continues to live for an additional 20 years. He's a very prominent rabbi, a leading authority. Now, this Montreux, again, it's a beautiful place in Switzerland, very quiet, very peaceful, very good in order to reclaim and regain your health. But what does a great rabbi has to do in this, God-forsaken place for Jews? And he is invited almost by the whole world, by rabbis in Yerushalayim, in Eretz Israel, by Rav Soloveitchik in the United States. Come and teach, come and lead, open your own yeshiva. And he decides to stay in Montreal. And there is no clear reason. In the letters that he sends to people, he says, I'm too weak, I'm sick, but that doesn't stand for 20 years. Many has suggested different reasons why he decided to stay out of the main role. Because you have to remember, he was the man that was the leading rabbi for the German Jews. No, it's not someone that cannot be a public figure. And there is no one can give a simple answer to a question of why someone is doing something. But it seems that few reasons do rise up. One is that, yes, he may have regained his physical composure, but he was mentally broken. He didn't feel that he has the strength to lead in a prime way. So he deferred and decided to stay somewhat in the side of the road. I think that's one reason that one cannot ignore. So it's an outcome of the war and his experiences in the war. The second is that he knew, and that's he writes in a few letters, he knew that if he would be in Eretz Israel or in the United States, he would have to choose between modern Orthodoxy and the world of yeshivot. And he didn't want to make the choice. As long as he's back there in Switzerland, he can send letters to everyone. And if he wants to make a decision and give a psak, he would give. And if he does not want, he would not give a psak. So everything that is too controversial, he can just overlook. He can just not address, maybe in personal letters, but no, he doesn't have to give public answers. But if you would come to the United States, then if you would be in YU, you would not be in Lakewood. If you would be in Lakewood, I'm just using that as staples. If you would be in Lakewood, you'd not be in YU. If you would be in Eretz Israel and he would teaching in Hebrew University because he is a giant of scientific Torah study. If you teach in YU, you cannot, right? In Bnei Brak, it wouldn't fly. And if you'd go to Bnei Brak, you'd not be able to teach in Hebrew University. But staying there in Switzerland, he was able to live in both worlds. However, it should be also sorrowfully be said, he could live also in neither one of them. Because he would not be able to lead as he was, obviously was able from a personal, he already did it, as I said, from his rabbinical career point of view. In Germany, he was a leader. He would be a leading authority, but he would not be a leader. And again, if you'd ask how many rabbis identify themselves nowadays as in the path of the Shriday, I don't know if you can even find 5. Many of us, meaning I'm saying us, rabbis, right? We'd learn the Tשוba to Shriday. We'd use them. It's beautiful. He's an extremely important rabbi, a great authority. But he was not willing to show the way and to say, Acharai. So instead, now again, I'm not saying that in any judgmental way. No one that didn't live the experience that he lived and can judge someone. So this is not judgment. I'm just describing what transpired, what happened. So as I said, he lived in both worlds, in between them, but in neither one of them. Is being seen by many in the modern Orthodox world of the time as the rabbi to go to, because he understands the modern Orthodox world. So the answer that I hope that we'll be able to learn today, which obviously we will not be able, was a question about the youth movement Yeshurun that was operating back then in France. But it was built upon the foundation of similar youth movements already operating in Germany before the war. And he was asked, are we allowed to have co-ed programs? And as we are all aware, I think familiar with Bnei Akiva, which is basically operating under the same guidelines. And some of the Haredim that came from Eastern Europe to France were highly opposed of these co-ed programs. So the leaders of Yeshurun sent a letter to Rav Weinberg asking him, give us your advice. Now, they wouldn't send it to someone in Yerushalayim, because these were rabbis that would not even understand the situation that we speak about. And Rav Weinberg pens a beautiful answer. And he says, you know, the people that are opposing you have very strong halachic statements to rely on. However, he says, the situation is requiring that you'd continue as you do. And he explains, it's a beautiful answer. He says, he's analyzing. He says, why are the youth leaving, abandoning faith? He says, you have to know, it's not because Judaism was proved wrong. This never happened. It's not because we don't have what to give in meaningful ways. Of course, Torah and mitzvot. Our problem is that the youth feel lonely. Because you have someone here, someone there, they feel that the modern world is connected, is vibrant, is alive. And Judaism is a relic of the past. And what we need to do is to give them this connectedness, that the Jewish world is connected to the modern new world. And the way to do it is by these youth movements. That is the hope to our future. If we would destroy these movements because of halachic minutiae, which is important, then we would maybe win some local battle, local fight, but we would lose the whole war. And of course, he's going to the halachic intricacies, and he says you are allowed to have co-ed educational programs, and you are allowed. He is writing. He says when he himself came from Eastern Europe to Germany, in the beginning he was shocked. He says I was invited to Shabbat meals, and I saw both the men and the women sing Shirei Shabbat. I was shocked. Never in Europe I saw a woman singing when a stranger man is present. But he says I was told that the Germanic rabbis, Rabbi Yitzhak, the greatest, Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, the greatest rabbinic authorities gave their permission. And then he goes into, again, halachic discussion, analysis of why it is allowed, because when a few people sing together, they don't hear the specific voices, and also it's Kodesh, and then you don't have improper... So he's getting into all of the halachic details. And then he says, anyone who knows, he says, no, that the women in Eastern Europe felt that they are dejected by the Torah and halacha. And then when things opened, they left the fold. But the Germanic women that seemed more modern and maybe less, observant, but they felt connection to Torah because they were part of the Shabbat meal, they were part of everything. So they felt very strong connection. So they remained more observant. We had less attrition in Germany than in Eastern Europe, which is, I think, something that is also undisputed. That's something that obviously was right from in a certain age, from a certain time, but it was undisputed. So that's, again, a very interesting response that was heavily relied upon in the later years by such movements as Bnei Akiva and others. as I said, in 1664, 1666, excuse me, he passes away. And I think here it would be proper to finish with the story we told in the first shiur. In the beginning of the first shiur, the Levaya process comes to Eretz Israel, and there's a whole dispute where he would be buried, in Sanhedria, near the Mizrahi, or in Har HaMenuchot, near the Agud HaGdolim. And this dispute is a representative of his life and his fate. And we may almost say that he wanted such a dispute, maybe not with the body wandering around, but he would have been happy with such. Excuse me? Yeah, that's what we told in the first lecture. Yeah, and that's very proper to the way that he chose to live his life. I would highly recommend, as I recommended last week, the Sefer of Mark Shapiro, Between Words and the Yeshiva World and the Modern Orthodoxy, about Weinberg. And also, I am not aware, I would try to look how much of his writing was translated to English, but he has a part of the Sridei, which is a halachic book. He also wrote a book named Lifrakim, which is containing his thought, his padim, history that he wrote of different people that he met. Extremely interesting, and it is always is one of these authors that his book is much thicker now after his death than what he was when he died, because as I said, the student of his is always adding, is finding more articles and he's adding it into the book. So it's already it's 2 volumes. It was printed in the 60s as one thin volume. When I bought it, when I entered the yeshiva, I have it, it's a very worn now, a book in my library. It was one thick volume. Now they already sell it as 2 thick volumes, and who knows how many volumes. So you should buy it now. It would be to take less place, in your library. Extremely, again, I don't know if there is an English translation. I would check it, Bezrat Hashem, but also highly recommended. Very, very interesting, and it's a path that in the end was not taken by the majority of the Jewish world, but I think to this day it is, at least it is relevant and vibrant and something that we can take from and learn from to our own life. Again, thank you very much. Yes.
This scientific approach to Torah study, but as soon as somebody publishes one paragraph saying Dvarim is written later by another author, then he's out, and they never listen to him again. This never happened to him. He never published that kind of thing.
That's right.
He didn't study it. He stayed away from it.
He was very very political sensitive. So some things he published, some things he didn't. And also again, because what he published was many times in newspapers. So it was easy for the yeshiva world to just ignore, because his informal response in the Sridei itself, he very rarely goes into such questions. And also he was always very, he always looked for the agreement of the ultra-Orthodox Gdolei Ador, you may say. And he very, very rarely disagreed with them openly. Sometimes, personally, he would give an answer, but very rarely gave a different response. So even in this response about the co-ed programs, which obviously would not fly in Bnei Brak, but also there he says it's only in the specific place in France, and there is a great need. So these people would not ask, the Chazon Ish anyway. They would ask only Rav Weinberg, and Weinberg would give him an answer. So he does not come into a clash heads-on with the ultra-Orthodox. So all of his life he was walking between the drops. That's why he stayed, as I said, I think that's the main reason why he stayed in Switzerland, because only there he was able to do so. If he would have made Aliyah and he would ask some difficult questions, then he would have to give some difficult answers that would not be able to be in both worlds.
Did he have a shul in Montreal?
He's even had, I think, a very small yeshiva where he was teaching, something that, it's a
nice climate.
It's
no, I wanted to. I've been there before. I want to take my wife for a bit, trip. But like, there's nothing.
There's nothing there.
I'm not aware of anything there
There's
now.
there is nothing now, and there was nothing there back then. And you know, he didn't have even the Sepharim that he wanted. It took him a long time to build his library. Nowadays, you can everything can reach from the internet. But some manuscripts, some of his work was stored because of that.
Oh.
And even he contemplated going to Oxford to see the manuscript, but he decided that he wants to stay in Switzerland.
Well, it's the reason that he stayed in Montreux is also maybe, I don't know if it's mentioned, but he was a bit of